Hello, everybody, and welcome to Outlawed Thoughts episode 70. Almost got that wrong. We're here with potentially criminal Sean. I was actually just watching your stream last night a little bit. You're covering I think it's already ended. That trial's already,
Yes.
Has already come to an end, but the Ethan Liming, or is it is Liming, right? I heard people pronouncing it different ways. So
Yeah, I think it's liming, from what I've been
okay,
told.
which that was a case that got a lot of media attention, and so I was interested to see sort of you covering it because it's not exactly what I expected that case to be. Um, Sort of interesting. I'm about like halfway through day one, and then I was just catching some of day three, so it's like jumping all over. But yeah, it's been an interesting last couple weeks on the internet. But I figured I'd sort of invite some guests on that are sort of connected to the law slash YouTube thing, and not necessarily LawTube, but that what was
Yeah.
previously known as the
Yes.
the artist formerly known as LawTube. But I've had a couple people on, and I have a buddy of mine, Tyler, so I have him on to talk about legal issues a lot. He's a
Mhm.
family law guy, and so occasionally I find people on the internet that I like more than others, and I came across your channel because of other YouTubers that you were collaborating with at the time, and you were a little more base than the others. So yeah, so you have remained in my subscriber feed for sure, and
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
yeah, it's always good to find people on the internet that are their channels aren't like huge yet, like they haven't blown up into the that kind of setup, but
Mhm.
they're still great. I've come across a few people on the internet in the last 5 years that I was like, oh, this guy's cool. He's got some people with 10 or 20 or thirty
Mhm.
thousand subs, and then I come back to that channel like 2 years later, and the guy's like 200,000. It's like, okay,
I,
well,
I'm 38 now, so I've been through multiple cycles of it on the internet with multiple people. It's like I
yeah.
remember them, and you're like, what the hell happened?
Mm-hmm. Well, I grew up, I didn't have like the whole Family Guy thing or TV
Mhm.
because I grew up in Alaska. That's where I'm at.
Ah.
So, uh, and I grew up kind of in the woods kind of setup, and so uh, they had this whole kind of system where I wouldn't have like cable. I had the internet, so I watched like my sort of sitcoms and things like that were absorbed through YouTube for the most
Mhm.
part. So like I would watch like gaming videos. Like that was the sort of Family Guy replacement at that point. Like because the comedy is a lot of the same and a lot of that stuff. And now I see those channels and they have like 20 million subs, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, what happened?
Mhm.
Uh, okay, because Nose Pope. There's Benzo Barbie in the chat. That's one of my
So Barbie.
usuals.
That's awesome. Somebody's
Oh,
asking, can you see Russia from your house?
mm, mm. I love this question because I've had like 3 guests ask this that I brought on. No,
No,
it's
somebody
actually like,
asked it. Somebody else
oh,
asked it in the
somebody in
chat.
chat. Okay. Oh, I see it right there.
Yeah.
Okay. Caught it. So no, but that is a fucking hilarious joke because that quote, like I am not a fan of Sarah Palin, so
Mhm.
put that out there. But at the same time, uh, when she made that statement, what she's
Mhm.
referencing is she
Or
was
the
trying to make a
Diomede.
joke.
Yeah.
Yeah, about the fact that at the closest point, Alaska's
Mhm.
only 52 miles from Russia.
Yeah.
But she just,
Her
she is,
proverbial doorstep.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. She is incapable of forming
Well,
intelligent sentences to a certain extent.
yeah, but back in 2008, that was also, they didn't give a shit what she said.
Yeah,
She could
yeah,
have said it eloquently, and they could have been like, well, actually, Miss Palin, you realize it was like 4.9 miles, not 4.8. Are you retarded? Like, they
yeah.
would have done that to her. I mean,
So
it was to the point where I remember one of the interviews she had, like the reporter looked over his glasses at her. It's like, do you know the fiscal policy of Tajikistan right now? Do you understand what's going on there? And she's like, what? She's like, You don't know that? Like that. To be fair, they did her dirty a little bit. Not
So
saying she's a Rhodes Scholar.
I'm fully aware of it because of I did this documentary on YouTube about this figure named Joe Vogler over here in Alaska, and in the
Mhm,
beginning of that documentary, I talk about how the political machine, when McCain chose Palin, just
mhm,
decided, well, we don't have to really attack McCain, we just have to absolutely destroy Palin, and so that is exactly what happened from the top down. It was like just
mhm.
I talk a lot about Max Blumenthal, who has slipped his way back into the good graces of a bunch of people on the internet, and I'm like,
It's
yeah, this dude was like, he wrote the worst shit about my state, and and I
oh
know he did to everybody else too. So it's
well.
like,
Remember who his dad was and where he got his.
yeah,
His family cut their bones working for the Clinton machine.
yeah.
A lot of these
Well, and
guys
he
have pedigrees.
he got most his. I mean, he got so much airtime. All his airtime came from Rachel Maddow, and now he's
Hmm.
like talking shit on her, and I'm like, I don't believe you. Like that's how
Yeah,
this works.
yeah.
You're a Mediaite. Like you're
Well,
part of
I
the
will say
problem.
though, there are some things he has. I think he's done
Hmm.
some random acts of journalism. Like I think
Yeah,
all the
there's
stuff.
his
It would,
coverage of war stuff has been. He has some decent stuff on war stuff.
yeah, like he's hit a couple of home runs that I don't think he meant to hit them. That gave him some
Hmm.
credibility. Like his stuff with the Derna gas attacks,
Yep,
and
yep.
that, like I said, that's where I think he meant to do some, like, I see I'm doing real work, guys, and it's like, oh shit, I blew the cover on, like, sorry, Aunt Hillary, didn't mean to do it.
he's
Please don't
he's
kill me.
gotten he's gotten in the good graces with
Mhm.
some libertarian types in my sort of field of the
Oh
internet, and
yes, no.
yeah, and it's unfortunate because I'm like, I don't, because for me it's more of a personal thing, because as I was researching this whole Vogler documentary,
Hmm.
I came to the conclusion that that guy was the dude who created most of the hatred on the internet around
Hmm.
this guy. And he did it off of like 3 articles he wrote for Rachel Maddow and Salon.com. And I'm like, and
Yeah.
he's never apologized for it. He'll never will. So it's like, the dude's
Hmm.
one of those guys that I'm like, this is exactly the type of slimeball people in the media we're supposed to be like,
Well,
hey,
well, Harry Reid, after Mitt Romney lost,
mm-hmm.
people are like, that was all bullshit, right? He's like, well, it worked, didn't it? And you're like, that
It was
that that
effective,
yeah,
so it works. That's
yeah,
just, if it's effective, they're gonna keep doing that shit. That's just how it goes.
yeah,
The scene from her house came from SNL. Tina Fey said it. Yeah, Tina Fey said it. It came
yeah,
from a quote from Palin, but
yeah.
uh, SNL. My last name's Radner, related to Gilda Radner, so the
Mm,
whole that's full circle. the
yeah. Well,
the
went down a lot from your relative being on the show. They've gone
Yeah,
down in
no
quality.
shit. I have a whole thing I want to do, like an episode on this channel about sort of where SNL is at, sort of showing side by side comparisons. It's gonna have to be done on Rumble because otherwise it's gonna get
just
copyright struck
just
into
like The Simpsons,
non-existence.
Conan O'Brien disappeared and went. Shoo.
Yes, yes,
Also, I
dude.
apologize. I'm wearing a. I was building a model earlier. I was streaming, so I'm sorry. I got like glue and shit on me. Sorry about
Mm,
that.
I've got, dude. This place is a mess outside of this little box.
Well,
That's why I went with the flat background for now, is
okay.
because it makes it so I don't have to worry about this shit.
Hmm.
And this is surprisingly easy to do. I just printed a
Huh.
bunch of pages. So
It looks good. I like it.
yeah, it
Does give
looks
it
all
gives you
right.
the Lasky, like the Frontier vibe.
Exactly. That's kind of, yeah. I get like the fake old radio and some books and stuff. It came out all right. But yeah, it's been interesting. I kind of went through and looked at some of the stuff you were covering. I saw that Lyman case, which I think is a bit interesting. I know you covered a little while ago some updates on the Delphi murders.
Yeah,
Um,
on Thursday. Yes.
yeah, and that's a an interesting case. I saw there was a sort of update at one point where the defense was talking about sort of Odinism and connections to like
Yeah.
occult stuff, which
Hmm.
I was reading some of that stuff. Now I'm reading it through like screenshots of court stuff on Reddit, so it's a bit different. But
Hmm.
um, I in Alaska, we have a lot of like paganism and that kind of stuff, and so I'm familiar with some of it, and I'm like, this is kind of interesting. Like
Mm-hmm.
this angle, like it'd be a hell of a trial. Like, but I don't know if there were any updates past that.
Well, I mean, all the updates were at some point somebody caused a leak of pictures of the crime scene to get released,
Mm-hmm.
and they were leaked, and it was attributed to somebody associated with the defense team. So basically, they were withdrawn from the case on Thursday morning, and by more like withdrawn, they were kind of forced out. So that's
That's rough.
well, there's some games are getting played there. Like the whole thing just reeks. The whole thing reeks.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think there's a question to be asked there because I know this is something that was kind of put forward by the defense. Was talking about the fact that like it seems as though law enforcement and people were aware that there was this sort of Odinist, you know, spiritualist, whatever angle to it, and they just sort of completely disregarded it
well,
based on an expert who, from my understanding, like no one found.
so the problem was the expert. They interviewed an expert, and they kind of buried the lead in their discovery, and then the defense team's like, "Well, wait, who is this person?" Because the expert actually said, "No, this is kind of what somebody who believes in paganism might do."
Right.
And they tried to say, "Well, we don't remember their name." And it's like, you interviewed somebody. How do you not remember their name? They said, "Oh, well, he disappeared." So the defense team filed their motion, and they raised holy hell about it, because you know what's going to happen? There's only so many professors at Purdue who understand, pagan stuff, who are going to be like, "Oh, wait, that's me." So the day after that motion got filed, the police are like, "Oh, fuck, we got to figure this out." They run to see the guy, and they talk to him and interview him again. And in part of the interview, he's like, "Yeah, where were you guys?" He's like, "It's been forever." And they're like, "Oh, sorry, we've just been busy." In reality, they were hiding things. And he says, it's not like somebody who is a Norse person from like 1,000 years ago. He's like, this is what somebody who thinks they're Norse, or like they're trying to be pagan. This is what they like a wannabe would do. And they basically said like you'd have to be a casual or a normie. It's like, oh, here's some runes I found, and
My
put them around the dead
grandmother has
bodies.
a degree in religious studies, and mind
Mm-hmm,
you, she got this in the it would have been the
mm-hmm.
70s or 80s, early
Yeah.
80s, mid 70s. And I was showing her some of the stuff that was on Reddit, like photographs and stuff and symbolism and things. And even she
Mm-hmm.
was like, I mean, that's definitely what it is, but it's like not, it doesn't really mean much.
It's not
Like,
correct. Yeah. You're like, they're
yeah.
trying.
So it didn't surprise me that that's sort of the take they had, because I sort of looked at the stuff and I know enough about, I watch all this autistic shit on the internet, so I'm
Yeah.
always like, it's just how it goes. So I'm looking at it going, I know this all looks like almost like what you'd put in a horror movie, trying to pretend like you're
Mm-hmm.
doing the symbolism. So, like, um,
Yeah, and there's just been one of the one of the girls, their boyfriend, their dad is a big pagan dude in the area who
right,
does the Odinism stuff. And then there's one of these guys who's in this like weirdo wannabe Odinist group who admitted to one of his family members, "Yeah, we killed him." And then
yeah.
like they just gloss over all that and rule these guys out right away. Now, Richard Allen's big problem, and this is something I tell everybody all the time, do not talk to the cops. He went and talked to the cops, and you make it easy for them, because now have you seen Memento, the movie Memento?
Yes, yes,
Okay, so you know what the cops do? They go, "You're my John Jay now. You're my bad guy." Guess
yeah.
what? Right, wrong, or indifferent, that is a very common way people involuntarily say, "Hey," while the guy's pointing his rifle around saying, "Hey, hi." And then they get the rifle pointed at, and they're like, "Oh my God, why am I getting shot at?"
So
And
not for a violent crime, but I've talked
Yeah.
about this a few times on my channel, but I was somebody who went through a trial here locally because I was accused of a crime which I did legitimately not do. And it was somebody else who did do it. And eventually, the fact that I didn't talk to cops and the fact that I made them get warrants and forced them to do their job is one of the reasons why I got a call from the fucking person that was in charge of the case saying your charges are dropped. It's like, and that was after the trial had progressed to the point where I told him, no, I'm going to trial, like, because I had a public defender. You're dealing with that, and it's like, but I'm in a small enough town that
Mhm.
it's like, yeah, I've got 2,000 people here. It's a small
Yeah.
area. So it's like, I was like, no, I'll take it to trial. Because I knew as soon as I did, they were either going to drop the charges or I'd win. Because I was
Yeah.
like, I know. And so sure enough, like they dropped it. And
Mhm.
today I look back on that case and I'm like, every other person the cops went and talked to just wrote them a novel, and then you get to my paperwork and it's like 2 pages. It's
Mhm.
like just basically the report of them coming into the place and waiting 9 hours to get a warrant.
Yeah. I mean, there's a saying, nobody talks, everybody walks. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there are so many of these cases, like the Ethan Liming trial. One of the older brother, when they arrested him, came in and talked. And I get it, he probably wasn't in the right state of mind, but still, had he not talked,
So at this
he probably would
point,
have got not guilties versus a hung jury on
right.
things.
So at this point, we know the result of that trial. What do you think that was? I mean, seeing what you have of the trial so far,
Hmm.
I've only gotten through part of the first day, so I'm sort of
Okay.
getting into the openings of stuff, and then I jumped in part of day 3 for a segment there, maybe like 30 minutes. Um, do you view that, looking at the opening statements and stuff, it's really, and looking at the cops, the first police officers who they had testify, was
Hmm.
interesting to me because I thought the first cop who sort of disregarded the gel blaster whole thing, he was sort of painting it as though, well, these are toys and cops know the difference and stuff. But I
Hmm.
had personally seen videos all across the internet in the last like 6 months of cops being like, we're banning these things in New York, we're getting rid of them. And
Well, in New York, they're banned because that technically counts as a firearm in New York. So that's the issue there.
oh, Jesus
Um,
Christ.
well, no, that's the funny thing. These actually were invented because of Australia. In Australia, you can't own a paintball gun; those are illegal. So they said,
Airsoft and
"Fine, we'll own an
paintball,
airsoft.
yeah.
We'll make airsoft guns." Australia said, "Nope, airsoft guns are illegal." And then they said, "Fine, we'll make this thing that shoots like softer things." Sorry, those are illegal too. So
Yeah. Okay. So that's
yeah,
that's the skinny on that. It makes
yeah,
sense, I guess, the reason they go from airsoft to that. Because I was like, I mean, it operates pretty much the same way, the
yeah, and it
sounds they make and stuff.
yeah, you don't change anything except like the caliber. And yes, overall they're fairly safe, but like they 200 feet per second, and
Yeah,
it,
it doesn't matter what you're
it's
getting
powerful
hit
enough.
by.
It's powerful enough to knock your eye out. I mean,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
if you were
absolutely.
to
I mean,
yeah, and
if
if
you
you were
hit somebody with a water jet at that speed, you could theoretically hit
oh yeah,
take their eye out. Like, I
well
mean,
yeah,
anything going that fast is not going to feel good.
yes, yes,
But I also think that, and I do
hmm,
think, seeing the way everything went, I think it, at the end, because I saw the one like headline I read through and read
hmm,
through the one story, and I was like, well, I mean, it doesn't seem like this isn't like, seems like this is pretty good. Like, it seems like kind of justice was done, but at the same time, I'm like, I haven't watched the whole trial yet, so I'm gonna have to like dig into things. But it seems to
well,
me like
yeah,
anytime you've got people in a car pulling up on two guys playing basketball or people playing basketball on their own, sort of secluded. It's like, yeah, that's a
hmm,
recipe for somebody to get their like, shit kicked in, and then when it happens, like, yeah, shit happens. The guy hit the
well.
pavement, like.
I guess I mean ultimately I mean is it okay if I spoil the verdict for you or do you already kind of know
Hmm,
the verdict?
I know the verdict. Yeah.
Okay. So, and I guess I'll tell you this then because the other kids that were in the car with Ethan Liming talk, And
Oh,
their entire argument, they all get it. They all take the stand. And the one thing they all say is like, "Well, we didn't want to fight them," and it's like, motherfucker, you decided that you wanted like,
you instigated that.
yeah, like
Yeah.
we didn't want to fight these guys. We wanted to go home. It's like in Bronx Tale. Now you ain't leaving. You know,
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
it's and you know you've you know, and they're like you fucked with random people, and then they want to fuck you up. It's like, now I will say these guys came from one of the suburbs of Akron, like one of the nicer towns, Fairlawn, and they came into the middle of Akron and they fucked around. It's like,
Yeah. So you're relatively close to this. I did hear
I
you
live
talk
about
about that.
45 minutes away. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, it's yeah, so you know that general area. So because to me, like when I was looking at the
Mhm.
layout, there was like a map they showed on one of the
Mhm.
news things, and where they showed like all the courts and stuff, and I'm like, oh, they basically went from like white picket fence homes to like
Well,
apart, not white picket,
they went from a better place to a not nice place.
more like, yes, to the more like, there's more apartment complexes and definitely more like just
Yes.
that kind of setup. And so I was like, well, this
Mhm.
seems to me like you've got a bunch of kids who probably live on the internet, and like this kid's 17, he's relatively popular, and all that stuff
Yeah.
plays into it. He probably just thought he's gonna get away with it. It's like, well, you fuck around and find out sometimes. Like,
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, do I think it's horrible that this kid has had to
yeah,
fuck around to find out?
didn't
Yeah,
need to
it's
happen.
awful. It's awful. Um, I wish it didn't happen, but say la vie.
Yeah, it's a learning experience for everybody else who watches it to go, hey, maybe
Yeah.
don't. Hey, like this thing that always gets me, right, is as a
Hmm.
culture we have decided that like 18, you're an adult, that's how this works. And then you hear all these stories, and I'm constantly seeing it. It's like 15-year-old, 16-year-old, 17-year-old.
Yeah.
It's like, man, like I like when I was 16, 17, like
Hmm.
I was, because I was secluded the way that we lived, being in Alaska the
Hmm.
way we were, it's like you didn't really have this shit. And so I see all this stuff, and I'm like, God, thank God I didn't grow up in a city. Like,
Yeah.
because I feel like if it was a city, it all would have gone to shit.
Yeah. Oh no, I agree. And for him, I mean, this sums it up. His purpose in life is now a warning to other people. So, like, he made a mistake, and now we know, don't do what Ethan did.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's the thing. And this, but people that bellyache about, oh well, it's unfair. Like, nobody deserves to die over an airsoft gun. It goes back to the whole arguments of, well, nobody deserves to die over a speeding ticket.
Yeah.
That's not what happened.
Yeah.
He got
Well,
punched, and yes, he happened to be, the way he fell and the way he cracked his head on the ground was like a 1 in a million shot, and he died. And it
yeah.
sounds
So
like he was, he was pretty much going to die anyway.
I've seen people get
Yeah.
um KO'd, like cracked
Hmm.
before. I watched one guy. He was big, tall dude, kind of
Hmm.
well known in our area as being kind of crazy, and he was like 6'6". This guy was just a brick shit house. But I watched him get knocked out at a skate park, and it's like concrete, everywhere, and it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, you realize pretty quickly how quick it's like, yeah, that guy's lights
Hmm.
went out, he drops, you're 2 inches to the right, that dude's just dead because you've got 200 pounds of weight coming down on that person's head. And it's like, in this guy's case, you've got
Hmm.
all the other fighting that was going into it. And this is
Hmm.
something I talk about. It's like, if you're going to go get, this is just some street advice, some life advice. If you're going to roll up on people and do this kind of shit,
Hmm.
maybe you should be rolling around with people who are willing to scrap and get in the fights and defend you, and not literally turn and run, or
Well,
just not
if
right.
if you listen to Ethan's friends when they testify, they're like, "Well, we didn't want to fight." Well, what did you do? I ran away like a little bitch. Like,
Yeah,
they refused to fight while their buddy is, and like I said,
literally.
I'm not
Yeah.
trying to spoil too much of it, but they refused to fight while their buddy, they're river dancing on him. They
Mhm.
are river dancing on him. They're like, "Well, I didn't want to fight." It's like, the fighting is commenced. Get the fighting or get away, and they chose to run away. And like, the one kid's on video running through the parking lots, running through McDonald's. Like, I ran all the way home, and it's like, buddy, you left your friend. Like, let's
Yeah.
you know,
I mean, to give you an idea, I
mhm.
when I watched the video, I
Yes.
was like, I mean, if if I had been in the
Hmm.
same situation as that kid, I had put myself in that stupid situation.
Hmm.
I immediately thought of the 3 or 4 people who I would have had with me. And the 3 or 4 people would have had with me are
Would have
not
been
people
whooping
who are going
ass.
to, yeah, they're the people who are going to be throwing down. Like, that's, you don't, like, I mean, to me, it's like, this is the difference between friends and stuff. And I know there was sort of this, you know, stuff put forward in the beginning of the trial that I was watching where they were talking about the fact that this kid had connections to dealing and stuff like that. And so
Yeah.
there was sort of this, and I kind of have a feeling that maybe some of the friends he had around him with him were friends that were there because of him being,
The weed guy.
popular and having weed and that whole
Yeah.
thing versus
I
actually being buddies. And
I
that's a
think that's
bad
fair.
situation to be in.
No, I think
Uh,
that's a fair argument. But I think part of it is though those kids just they didn't grow up getting into fights. Like,
soft people.
well, yeah, but it's also the idea of like, oh, these guys are gonna fight me now. Like,
Hmm.
it's on.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
sorry, we're going. Wait,
Yeah. I
no.
mean,
And
I don't know many
yeah,
people here in Alaska who, I mean, I think it's just a culture here, but like you kind of just get in fights. Like that's just kind of how it is. Like it's
yeah.
the whole state's like
Or
that.
or
Like
if you don't want to, you make sure you avoid that issue.
right, or yeah. And I mean, it's also like there's mutual combat here, and everybody's sort of like armed for the most part, like because
Yeah,
it's Alaska, and so it's like there's always sort of this vibe of like, well, yeah, I mean, if you want to fight, we can go out and fight and it's fine. I mean, no one really, it's sort of just part
yeah.
of the environment. But it's also the state sort of known for its violent crime statistics, I suppose.
Well, I mean, but you guys are also on the frontier. I mean, it's still the frontier more or less. You're the
Well,
frontier.
yes.
You're the frontier with Pornhub.
Yeah. Oh God. I
I mean, pretty much.
every year when their most searched comes out, Alaska is always some fucked up thing. It's all
Yes.
these people with no sun just sitting up here on.
Well, you guys are about to get to that point of no sun, so
Yeah, it's started. My hair's getting darker and it's all getting, yeah.
oh no.
Yeah, it sucks. There are bears around. uh there we just when I was walking to work like 2 days ago, there was a black bear in the roadway, and then a few days before that, one got shot outside my workplace. So,
Oh no. Oh,
well, they get over here in my
yeah.
town. They'll come through and tear shit up, so they kind of move
Uh,
them out. Uh, the black bears will pretty much just move on before anybody has to put a hole
uh,
in them, so it's
better than
kind
a
of not
brown
a
bear.
problem. Yeah, the brown bears are a bit of an issue. We've had a few of them the last few years come through, but one of them got somebody's dog. I remember that. That was pretty
Mm.
bad. And then one gnarled up a teacher
Oof.
here like 3 or 4 years ago, and his dog was basically what saved his life because his dog
Mm.
was with him, and his dog's was able to distract the bear from him to the dog, and then the bear went after the dog, and the dog was able to get away. And so he ended up surviving. He got his chest ripped up pretty good though. I mean, nothing beats the story of Gene Moe. I've told that on this stream before though, but it's an insane story that I have a video on my channel about. But Gene Moe was a dude who in Alaska, if you know Buck knives, Buck makes the Model 110, which is like the very famous. It's just a folding liner lock knife. It's like that big. It's a pretty small
Yeah.
knife.
It's the old
Uh,
reliable.
yes, it is. It is sort of the standard, and everybody here sort of uses them. They've used them for years, and it is what it is. Well, Gene Moe was out hunting. He's got his hunting rifle, sets his hunting rifle aside, goes to skin this deer that he had killed, and while doing it, a Kodiak grizzly whacked him and
Mm.
began tearing off his arm and ripping him apart. And Gene Moe, at the age of 67, I believe he was when this happened, was able to kill that bear with that Buck 110 knife, and then with all of that damage, hiked a mile out of the bushes, out of Kodiak country, to civilization and survived and had the
Hmm.
bear skin hung on his wall.
Jeez,
he's
that's awesome.
he is a based individual, and I think he's even still alive. I think he's in his like late 80s at this point.
Oh.
But he's still kicking around. I think he had a bunch of kids. He was a very religious guy.
Hmm.
And so that story got panned. You can Google it, and it's around, like hunting magazines wrote about it and
Hmm.
stuff like that. But not a lot of people wrote about not a lot of people wrote about his story, because when everybody would ask him why he survived and why he lived, he would always say God, and he like would go into sort of this religious.
Yeah, and they're like, oh, we don't need to hear this now.
Exactly, and so it just sort of deflated his story for the most part, which I hate, because it's like, well, this guy's like grew up.
Yeah,
religious.
sure. I mean, like you're gonna have to believe. You're not just gonna. They're not gonna find an atheist. Well, actually.
Well, I heard him tell that story, and in that story, he talks about how he had to stop 3 times while he was walking the mile and a half back to where he could get saved. And there were 3 times where he had to lay down because he couldn't move, because he had like his whole arm was ripped down, and I mean, it just destroyed.
Yeah.
And he literally like talks about how he laid there and looked up at the sky and prayed and did the whole thing and got back up and was able to keep going. And it's like, well, if you're somebody who believes that going into it, and then that happens to you, yeah, of course, you're never gonna not be that thing. That's just kind of how it works. Like, that's human nature to me. Oh, I just knocked out my camera. Give me one.
That's how. He's getting all emotional, folks. You need to calm down.
No, I'm
gonna get my. No, well, he's working on that. Ready. I guess I'll hold down the fort for a minute. You guys, my name is Potentially Criminal, like you said. You can find me over on YouTube. You can find me on Twitch. Surprisingly, I have not been kicked off Twitch yet. Keep in mind, it'll happen one day, though. Probably.
It's inevitable.
Yeah. Oh, well, I've had more than one person when they've commented it from Twitch, and I'm just like, fuck you. And they're like, I'll report you. Okay, have fun. But you can also find me on Rumble. That's like the fallback. And then my ultimate fallback is BitChute, because that's like a nuclear bunker. It's perfect.
Yes, I am lamenting the death of Odyssey.
Yes, rip. Yeah, big F's in the chats, guys.
Jeremy Kaufman putting his focus in other things. I saw that tweet and him sort of talking about that. And yes, it is sad. The federal government is a son of a bitch.
Yes, well, especially the SEC.
Yes, the SEC and the IRS are probably the 2 worst groups on the planet, other than maybe all the ATF. Well, shit. The list is so long at this point that it's hard to rank them. Maybe that should be a stream. I need to do a ranking the federal organization stream.
Yeah.
No, it's this whole thing has been sort of crazy recently. Obviously, you've got all the federal government confirmed gay. Also, Eddie Grimm, shout out to you. I know you said you were drunk already. That's always good. Actually, you know what? I've got to work later, but it's later, so I'm gonna have some. I've got some Four Roses Small Batch Select. This is the birthday whiskey that I'm working through. So.
Well, there you go. Nice birthday present.
Yeah, that was my brother. That was really nice of him. I was happy about it. I got this a few years ago. Everybody always asks about this book randomly, but this is The Great Movies. I've been reading this last week. I'm like halfway through it now. It's signed, which is cool, because I'm not like a huge Ebert and Roger Ebert is Roger Ebert, but it's cool to have a book that was signed by him.
Oh, no, nice.
I don't have many weird books, so I'm trying to read the ones that I do have and then slowly stack them up as I go. That's sort of the plan.
You got to collect them, and then people are like, oh, there's a lot of books.
Yes. So what is it so this is a question that I sort of, we'll go through some of this as more of an introduction thing 30 minutes in, as I normally do. Because absolute chaos. But What is it that you do like for work and stuff other than YouTube? What is
Well,
your actual?
so I'm a practicing attorney. I practice. I do a lot of criminal defense work, but I practice everything. Like
Mhm.
Friday, I was helping a couple people get their wills signed. But I kind of do whatever. Um, but that's mainly my thing is doing the criminal stuff. That's the most fun for me.
So you probably would have handled a case like the one I had, which is sort of perfect. That's
Yeah,
that's that's
I mean,
yeah. No, that's
I've done it all. I mean, I've done it all from speeding tickets up to like drug. A couple dudes doing a
yeah.
stick up in a drug house and smoking one of the ladies. So
Oh Jesus.
yeah.
So my case is basically I had a I was home like at my
Hmm.
place and had somebody come in and claim that they did drugs at my place, but like
Mm.
I wasn't there. So what I had found out later on was that somebody else had went to my place with this person, uh,
Uh,
and and so it ended up all coming out in court, but it never went to trial because when as soon basically this is the funny thing that happened, right?
hmm.
The guy who actually did this left his box with his shit at my apartment, right? And I knew
Yeah.
that shit wasn't mine. So when the cops took it as evidence, I was like, I know eventually this is going to come out that it's not mine and it's going to deflate this entire thing. Well, the fucking idiot left a business card of his father in the bottom of that box.
Makes it even
And
easier for you.
and so when my lawyer started looking at stuff, he just literally laughed. He's like, "This is hilarious!" Like because he knew immediately, like, "Oh, they're fucked." Like, and then it immediately changed like the whole way we were handling it because he's like, "No, I mean, like, this is clearly not your shit.
Hmm.
Like, it's why would you have a business card with names on it on the back written in handwriting? Like, it doesn't really make sense." Um, Sean is a practicing attorney.
Yes.
I
Um,
recognize that name, and I think that's somebody who I see in your chat all the time. So
yes.
that must be who that is.
Yes.
Nice to meet everybody. I see
I
a
see.
couple people in here.
Yes. Why'd you frame your man's father? That's awesome.
That guy had a whole bunch of other problems too.
Yeah.
That whole family was tweaked.
Oh.
But
Oh, I'm seeing
I
one of you guys in chat says he has a copy of the Glass Factory signed by Braxton McCoy. That's pretty
who
dope.
Jesus
That's
Christ.
nice.
Oh, that was Eddie Grimm, I
Yeah.
think. Damn, Eddie.
Yeah.
That's actually like
That's a moon rock. There
save
aren't too
that
many of
shit.
those, I don't think.
No, there's no way. I don't
Hmm.
know. Yeah, that's got to be like I don't know. I've seen so I have like some vinyl albums and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
I've got a couple that are like signed, and you start looking into like,
Hmm.
oh, this person signed nothing, and so this album's worth like an insane amount of
Yeah.
money, like, and so I went through like I gotta think about like okay, well this one's worth getting going and sending off to get checked out, and this one's worth it, but this one not so much.
Hmm.
Uh, I have a Led Zeppelin album that's like
Oh, is he back or did he? Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'm back here again. It's mine now. Uh, so I guess adverse possession. I'm gonna learn some lawyer stuff now. Say even in Alaska, I'm homesteading now. This is my show. And he's saying, "Oh, you met Braxton once. Really cool dude. Yeah, seems like it. I follow him on Twitter. He is hilarious. I love listening to his stuff. So um, they're not saying I collect historical authors' letters. That's neat. That's got to be hard because a lot of them, if they're prolific writers, their papers are turned over, and donated usually. So that's interesting that you could get that. Um, Eddie's saying, "Do you have any albums that look cool? I have some cool looking vinyl." I assume you're not talking to me because I know I don't have vinyl. I don't have any albums. Eddie's saying, "What state am I in?" I am in the state of Ohio. I practice out of the Cleveland area. No, trust me, it's not a dox. I am in the eastern suburbs of Cleveland, not on the east side, not on the east side. Okay, because otherwise I'd be, you'd be seeing me sitting here in the window with like that thing on me, looking out the window to make sure I had to take care of business. No, I'm on the eastern side of Cleveland, basically from like east of Cleveland all the way to the Pennsylvania line. I mean, it's not really that far. It's only like an hour's drive to Pennsylvania. So, but no, over that way, and then in the surrounding areas. So not too much, not a super huge area. Eddie says, "I live Ohio. I'm in Appalachian, Pennsylvania." Okay. Oh, you have letters from T.E. Lawrence. Ooh, that's pretty cool.
Okay, so my laptop died.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's what I was thinking.
So I'm not sure. My audio is probably going to be a little worse for wears, but I'm here.
It's okay for me.
All right. Well, we'll roll with it. I still have access to chat and all that. I love Ohio. I'm in Appalachia, Pennsylvania. Yeah. So anybody who's into the whole Appalachia thing and that whole Appalachia, I don't know how are you supposed to pronounce that? Anybody who's into that sort of living can kind of adapt to Alaska. I know a lot of people who come up here, and everybody complains about the weather, but once you get used to it, it's kind of the same thing. It's a lot of woods and dense forests and places to disappear, which I love. Like have you if you're in what I imagine where you're at, it's more like city kind of living, or are you in?
For right now, I mean, as of right now, I am. Yeah, I live in the suburbs east of Cleveland, so it's pretty dense. But I mean, I've lived everywhere from. I mean, where I grew up as a kid, it was like going to Walmart was like an hour drive. Like I lived out in the middle of nowhere, so
That's how it was with me. Yeah, same
yeah,
shit.
yeah. It was nice. Like I grew up, it was like you got on the bus. We were like the first ones on the bus and the last ones off the bus as kids. I mean, it was.
I was homeschooled, so that shit went even deeper.
Well,
Yeah, I was really secluded.
yeah. So no, I mean, I'm used to like I enjoyed the facts of being able to live out in the edge of I loved it, and when I got back when I was married, we were looking at property and looking to buy a house. I was like, there was something to be said about I can go do whatever the fuck I want on my own property and do what I want with my land. I mean, like here for example, I like if I wanted to get my bow ready for deer season and I sat here in my driveway and probably shot into my garage, I guarantee I get the police coming after me. And in the town I was in when I first started practicing when I was in law school, way over on the west side of the state. I grew up, or I didn't grow up, but I lived in a smaller town outside one of the bigger cities in Ohio, and
Okay.
it was not against the law to lob missiles as long as you did so responsibly. So I set my target up against my shed, and I lived on this corner lot that was like it was oblonged. It was longer than it was wider.
Right.
So
Perfect.
I was sitting like it was like probably 120 feet across, so it's like 40 yards. And I was basically I had to stand within a foot or two of the one of the main streets in town, and I'm sitting there in front of people just chucking arrows across my property, across my backyard at my shed, and every once in a while I'd hit the shed. Somebody called the cop, and the cop came over. He's like, "Well, what are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm shooting my bow." And he's like, "At what?" I'm like, "My target." He's like, "What if you miss?" I'm like, "Well, I put a hole in my shed and I get really mad because then I break it."
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it was nice in the areas I was in for a long time, just being able to have that, like here it's a little different. Like there's an HOA and like, oh,
Yeah, that's rough.
your garbage truck, your letter, like your garbage cans are out. It's like, but it's funny because they claim to have all these rules, but in the meantime, like people put up all kinds of fences and they didn't clarify anything. So we have all kinds of fences. People put up all different kinds of pergolas and patio structures, and it's just like I love how they can't do anything about it now because it was all done before it was done before they got ready. Like, so I love that part about it the most. Where I'm at, it's like they've been stymied, but I wish there wasn't one.
Man, potentially criminal looks exactly like my lawyer. It's wild. Sean is everywhere.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing, Eddie?
I don't know. How much is it for a gallon of milk where you're at, Leighton? So right
Yeah.
here, I think it's about 4.29, 4.59, something like that.
Oh, it's not too bad.
It's not bad. No. Everybody thinks it's insane, but it's not. The prices go up when you're in rural areas. So if you're in like some native village or some area with a population under a couple hundred that's in the middle of nowhere, yeah, you're probably going to pay $12 to $15 for a gallon of milk. But that's not because the milk's expensive. It's really because everything has to be flown in by plane. And so when you're doing it that way, the price of everything becomes insane because you have to count in basically the cost to fly everything back and forth with like bush pilots.
Yeah.
There's not like an airliner that's dropping stuff off, or like it's like a little plane, like a Cessna.
Yeah, it's the bush
you know.
planes, yeah.
So I'm covering one of the next videos I'm going to be doing on here, sort of documentary style videos, is going to be on this guy Nick Begich, which some people will know this story, some people won't. Nick Begich and Hale Boggs were both representatives for their given states. Hale Boggs came to visit Alaska, came to visit Nick Begich for a campaign stop, went to fly from Anchorage to Juneau, and vanished. The plane and them were never seen again. Now, the case is sort of seen by half the people who cover it as a plane that crashed that we don't know the whereabouts of. Some people, myself included, cover it with a different take, which is that I don't think there's any plane to find because I think the thing was blown into pieces or destroyed. And this comes from a bunch of other stuff, but it's going to be probably around 30, 40 minutes long. I wrote like a 20-page thing on it, so I'm going to be sort of consolidating that into a video. But it's an interesting story.
Is it? Well, I don't mean to spoil it too far. Like was this kind of like a accidental shoot down, or was this like an intentional shoot down?
No, so basically, everybody sort of, and I don't mind talking about it, spoiling stuff, just because I've published stuff on this as well, so it's like out there already. But the basically, the whole story connects to this guy named Two Tonys, who was a mafia figure who died in prison, connected to I think something like 8 different murders for the various crime families. But he was in Alaska at the time. There's a guy, I believe his name's Sean Porter or something like that, who wrote a book, who has a big YouTube channel, wrote a book about this guy because he was his cellmate. And so he wrote like a memoir about the guy and got some information that wasn't public before, including the fact that he delivered a suitcase to somebody who was supposedly getting on that plane. And the fact that when planes go missing here in Alaska, typically you find something, right?
Yeah.
Like, even if they go in the water, like the whole state is basically built in a way that everything sort of comes back to the land. So it's just sort of how it works. But in this case, nothing's really ever been found. And if it crashed on land, it's even easier to find. Now, to go deep on this, like they used the U-2 spy plane. Right? These were 2 high-figure individuals that went missing, so the FBI and people got involved.
Yeah, the House Majority Leader was the other guy. Yeah,
right. Hale Boggs,
right now. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, and Hale Boggs was connected to the Kennedy the investigation and stuff, and so there's a bunch of stuff like that. This is Cokie Roberts' father, if you know who that is. It's fucking crazy. Like
all this incestuous shit.
Yes, and so the whole fucking thing is wild, and not many people have covered the story because, again, it's like sort of Alaska. No one covers the stories up here. That's why the Vogler thing irritated me back in the day, is because, like, this is an insane story where this guy was about to give a speech at the UN and then just vanishes, and no one cares about it. Like, and it's like, this is kind of crazy. But with this, I believe most likely that plane took off like it was supposed to, everything was fine, and it was blown into pieces. I think it was blown up. And there's a lot of evidence behind that, and people who have sort of hinted at those things and stuff along there. Where that plane was flying was through an area where if you did that, it's very unlikely anybody's going to see it or hear it. Like, it's just an area where it's just not, there's no people. Like, it's just the way the state is.
Sure.
And everybody sort of points to, there was originally this argument that was made about the plane icing up. And that was the issue that caused them to crash. But about 3 years ago, this guy named Scott Walzak, I think is his name, or Tom Walzak, he's a writer, journalist, ended up finding out that the reports were incorrect about the de-icing materials that were on the plane, and in fact, they did have the ability to de-ice. And so this whole theory about the plane icing up and them crashing and we just haven't found it yet just never really made sense, because this guy proved definitively, like, he found the maintenance records for this plane showing that this was on board. So it's an interesting story, but it's it's unfortunately one of those ones where, like the Vogler thing, you never can really solve it. Like, it's nothing you're ever going to really come to a definitive answer on. I make a point in the video that a script I wrote to be like, even if you found the plane's wreckage today, you couldn't really prove how the thing crashed, because they've already admitted that they don't really know. Like, they don't have any knowledge of how things would have gone wrong on the plane to begin with. They like to point at the record of the pilot too a lot, which I go deep into, because I looked up the guy's record and he had a ton of history flying in that area. So I was like, this is not somebody who was bad at it,
Yeah, well, then there's Frank Murkowski was involved. Like, wow, there's all kinds of nasty shit with Nick Begich.
Yeah.
Begich, man, he swam around some nasty people.
Yeah, the Begich family is well. So here's the deal: like, everybody, Alaska gets like forgotten historically because no one really is paying attention to the fact this place has so much open corruption going on and open fuckery. It's like not even really concealed, because the government decided after World War II and the kick up of the Cold War and the Russians that, like, they had to have control of Alaska from a military point of view heavy. And so this place is just peppered with secret military installations and bases and fucking land you're not allowed to go to, and black holes on Google Earth that they're like, you don't need to know what's over here, that kind of shit. And when you start getting into it, it's like this state is a giant warehouse for the lower 48 and the federal government. So that's how they look at this place, and so they use it as like just military post in a way.
Yeah.
So
everything's up there.
Yeah. So the story I did, this documentary, I'll try to cover this as quick as possible because I don't want to bore people who've heard this, but since we have new people in the chat, the documentary I made about Vogler, which is on my channel, it's about 45 minutes, and I tell people to go watch it because it's an insane story that none of you will ever have heard. Vogler was a guy who moved to Alaska during World War II. He was from Kansas. He became a lawyer. He passed the bar in Kansas and moved to Texas. He did some work there. He got fired from his job in Texas for calling FDR a commie bastard, right? So this is just to give you an idea, like, the guy's point of view. So he went to Alaska because he didn't like politics and the way the world was working during World War II, so he wanted to get away from it. And he ended up making his way to Fairbanks, Alaska. He bought a mine, and he started operating a gold operation. He started investing in apartment complexes and stuff, and he was really successful. By the 70s, he decided he grew very frustrated with Alaska and the Trans-Alaska Pipeline and how the federal government was taking land. At that point, they owned 40%. Today, they own 60% of Alaska is owned by the federal government. So he decided to sort of try to do what he could against it, and so he created this thing called the Alaskan Independence Party. And back then, people were talking about it as a joke, but in a year, he got like 10,000 signatures on petitions in a state with like 150,000 people in it, arguing for the removal of Alaska from the Union, like legitimate secessionist talk. And so that moved into him going down this legal angle where he started making legal arguments for the deal that Alaska was given during the admittance into the Union and all this other stuff, and making these sort of arguments. And you can go read this on the AIP website. They have all the stuff he wrote from a legal angle, which I'm going to cover on the channel eventually, but I have to get lawyers into it first because I need people who know the stuff better than I do. But the skinny of it was he wanted to make an argument to the UN, and everybody always sort of looked at this whole group as a joke. But then they started winning smaller elections, and then this guy named Mike Gravel came along, and another dude here in Alaska, and they rallied around them. And in the I think it was in the 90 election. It was the 1988 or 90 election. Their candidate became governor of Alaska. So they had a third-party candidate of this small party called the AIP, who had very, in comparison to the Democrats and Republicans, a very small base, but became governor of the whole state. And at the time, Vogler, who created the AIP, was the head of the party. So he was, in charge of the party that was in charge of the whole state of Alaska, which is kind of a big deal. Then he started, you had to get a sponsor to go speak to the UN, right? And and it's still how it is today. So he was trying to get sponsored by all these different countries, and he would send out these letters and try to get these people to recognize him. And at the time, Ali Khamenei over in Iran was having disputes with the United States. And so he wrote Vogler a letter agreeing to sponsor him. And so Vogler was supposed to fly out to New York to speak at the UN, and 3 days before that was set to take place, his neighbor went to his house and he was missing. And he was found months later having been shot in the back of the head and the back, and wrapped in a tarp, and was thrown into Fairbanks, which is a place here in Alaska. And
they ruled that a suicide?
No. So this is where it gets interesting. They arrested a guy, and the guy who they arrested was a criminal who shouldn't have been out of prison in the first place. He's supposed to be in a halfway house. They let him out for no reason. Name was Manfred West. Cartoon Freddy was his street name, criminal name. And he was an artist, so it actually made sense. But he's still alive. He's in prison right now, actually about 2 miles from where I'm sitting. I live pretty close to the max security prison here. But that dude, I believe he killed Vogler, is connected to killing Vogler, but I don't think he did it alone. Vogler was extracted from his home and after this killing happened and moved miles away, and nothing was left behind. And his dogs had been drugged. Vogler had like 5 dogs, all of which got drugged and then locked up, the whole thing. So none of it made sense. And I'll put the words to the lieutenant governor at the time, somebody who was a very very well-known figure in the state of Alaska, Jack Coghill. Jack Coghill's statement on it was the cleanest extraction he had ever seen his entire career, and he doesn't understand how one man alone could have done it. And he called it an extraction because it was never really confirmed whether or not Vogler was killed on his property or not. Even though that was the story the cops went with and the story that Manfred West went with, it was never really confirmed legally. And that's because when Manfred West's trial went to trial, when everything was supposed to go in and you would have all this stuff aired out, right? He pled no contest for a break. And so there was no trial, and none of that evidence was ever made public, and so none of it's there. And so it was, to me, it's like, well, this is a patsy. Like, you basically, this is what that is. Like, and so I go into the documentary and kind of like, where it's like, this doesn't make any sense. I show, like, Manfred West was this little meth head. how is this little meth head moving Joe Vogler when he's a limp body without leaving any evidence behind?
Mhm.
When you just drop the guy in his yard, there's snow on the ground. Like, that's just not how this works. Like, anybody who's lived in this area or lived in the state knows it's not like you're in the weather they were in and the situation he was in, and none of it made sense. Like, you'd have something left behind. And it wasn't like this guy was a sophisticated criminal. This is a guy who got caught doing check fraud. Like, so it's like
Yeah.
not your like, sophisticated criminal type. But he had been connected to Vogler in the past, and so he flew to Alaska on a fake name when he came back to the state and things like that, which
Wow.
point me in the directions of him being sort of maybe an informant and somebody who was feeding the feds information on the group and stuff that was
Certainly.
happening politically, because he was like volunteering for stuff with the party and doing all this weird stuff around. I talked to, when I was doing the documentary stuff, I talked to the secretary of the party who was still alive. I talked to like 8 or 9 people who were in the party in positions of like authority, or were, friends of Vogler, friends of Manfred West, or people connected to the stuff. It's one of the benefits of living over here. One of the other story I'm going to cover is Kristen Snyder, which, if you've ever heard of Nexium, that cult, that's one of the murders. That's one of the people who's attributed to dying because of Nexium. And her body, where she supposedly committed suicide, is literally a mile and a half from me. So I'm going to be covering that and doing like actual like video full on where it happened, supposedly. But that story is very weird to me, because when you start looking into how she supposedly committed suicide, none of it makes sense. Because anybody who knows this area, again, I live here, it's like, well, if you're telling me that woman put herself in a kayak and drifted out to the water to kill herself, that's not how this works. Because she's going to end up right back through resurrection, right back here, because that's how the water runs there. And so you're going to have a body on the beach. Like, that's just how it works. And instead, you don't have anything, and it's like, there's sharks right there that are waiting to gobble up a body. This isn't fucking Hawaii. Like, so I think in her case, I actually don't know that woman died. It's one of the cases where there's apparently Nexium paid money to try to investigate whether she was still alive. And I'm like, well, why would this cult be paying money to try to investigate whether a woman who supposedly killed herself is still alive, and not merely making it public until they were, it was outed in court? It's like, that doesn't really make sense. And if you know this area, you know where she supposedly offed herself and left her truck and note, is right where you have no cameras or access to video. So if you wanted to get to a boat that was on the other side, you could very easily take a kayak and just run that distance and get on a boat and leave, and no one would ever really know where you fucking went. That's kind of the beauty of being on boats in this area, is unless you go into a port that's not in the U.S., right? Mm-hmm. No one really knows where you went, because you go from here to a U.S. state, unless you get stopped by somebody, it's not really a trace of it if you don't have a port that you're at. It's like,
makes sense.
So it's I like those kind of stories where it's like stuff that has a legal angle but also has like a true crime angle and that kind of stuff. I've been sort of branding it as when I do the Beggage thing and the Vogler thing, I branded it as political true crime, or political cold cases. This sort of concept of like, there's all these things that get shoved in the cold case or mystery on YouTube category that have a different angle that no one really looks at, because it's like, well, this is like, person was connected to all this weird shit, like, which Alaska has a lot of that, because the federal government and the military got so involved over here in the 50s and 60s and onward. Oh no. Well, so what has been your okay, so this is one and you don't have to talk about this because I don't know if you have on your channel. or whether you want to get involved or even have a public discussion about it. But have you paid attention to this whole Rippaverse like Eric July shit?
Yeah. Um, hmm. I'll say it like this. I think what people have done to Eric July. Oh, are you still there? 'Cause my screen just went blank.
I'm here, yeah. I can
Okay,
hear
wow,
you.
that was weird. My screen just. So, I mean, here's how I look at it. Dick and Vito are assholes. Eric July, I think, he's done something those guys haven't been able to do. Vito keeps talking about his comic, never made one. Like EVS, all these other guys. You know what? You could say his comics like mid, and like the problem for me is I've never been a comic book guy. Like I was the 13-year-old reading Tom Clancy. So like I was like a 13-year-old boomer to start with. I was terminally boomered. So I never read comic books. So like when I look at them, I'm like, they all look the same to me ultimately. And I know some of you out there might be like, but Sean, there's graphic novels. And it's like, okay, they're comic books still. To me at least. But okay, it might be mid, and the idea like, well, I'll make it something that this one's not going to have trannies sucking each other off in it and all that fun stuff. Okay, cool. He sold something to the public. The public wanted it. They gave him millions of freaking dollars. So you can talk all the shit you want about him, but dude raised like $5 million. Just saying, I want to give you what you want, and everybody's like, hell yeah. Now, as far as that goes, I'm not gonna. Eric's doing great. That said, though, I think he's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder too, and I think part of his thing is like he wants to fight, which is a bad problem because Dick and Vito want to troll him, and he's playing into it. Now, do I think
so? So that's exactly what I said on my stream when we talked about it. I was like, he's playing right into what these people want. Why is he doing this?
Well, it's hard not to. I mean, these guys are fucking with you, and they're fucking with him in such a way, like all the stuff he wants to do, they are just screwing it up. And they could claim they weren't involved in telling this ISOM group about all of it, but somebody dry snitched, and that's not cool. Is it legal? Yes, it's legal. It's not tortious interference. There's nothing wrong with it. Now, do I think Eric July's got a fairly decent argument of winning this? I think so. I think that they actually have he's got a decent leg to stand on as far as.
So I had Tyler Yonke, the attorney I know, the family law guy, but still he came on and we talked about it for about an hour too. And me and him both had the same legal take. Both of us had to take, this guy's got a good case. July should have a good defense to this. This isn't the end of the world for him from a legal angle. But he also
Eric's case is going to require a fight though.
Yes, it is going to be expensive. And that's what me and Tyler talked about, was it's going to cost a lot of fucking money. Because these guys have money too, and you're going into this sort of lawfare at this point, and that's just how it is. I will say for my, what we talked about on that stream, and sort of I made a shorter video, which I know got more views than I'm used to getting on here about the topic, but I'll say this. I think the shorter video I did was much more calm and collected than the stream, because obviously, that's always a little more chaotic. But I did, I will say this. I think I was a fan of Eric July's for years. I watched his content up until he made the sort of shift he did from doing politics and pop culture to just sort of pop culture stuff. He sort of moved over to just covering comics and movies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so that's when I sort of stopped watching this stuff as much, because I'm like a libertarian ANCAP guy, and so I was coming at it from that angle, less of the pop culture stuff, because I've read comic books before and stuff like that when my mom was a big comic fan and stuff. So, but I covered the fact that so I was a fan of his, and then I was a fan of Eric July and Vito's, to be honest. I mean, I followed I mentioned this on the stream, but I've followed Dick Masterson, was probably maybe the first, if not fifth or sixth person that I discovered on the internet. because when I was getting on the internet, it was right when I was watching the Dr. Phil stuff and all that kind of stuff, and Men Are Better Than Women in the book and all that. And, Vito, because of his involvement with Dick, I came across him, and sort of that was how it worked.
Yeah.
But I was also watching the show during this whole Eric July drama. So as all this was developing, I was watching both sides of it because I'm listening to Friday Night Tights and I was listening to Eric July, and I knew Vito had done the whole copyright strike stuff and that thing, and I talked about that on Twitter and excoriated him and talked about how I thought that was the bitchest thing ever. And eventually I think he apologized and they kind of moved on from that, and so there wasn't much getting brought up about that stuff anymore. And for the most part, everything was friendly except for the fact that Vito, being Vito, had this he's just, it was jealousy, like that's 100% what it was. But I also think that Vito viewed what Eric was doing as politically against what he's for too. So there's also that left wing shit that he has that I think came into it. But he started talking shit about Eric on the show pretty early, and Dick, which I talked about this, was always defending Eric July. He did this for months and months of me listening to the show. Eric defended him having a comic book, defended him selling it and making all this money. He was using it to make fun of Vito, basically. But he goes on the stream. He ends up getting told to review the book. He reads the book. He does this note thing. And from then on, I have to say, like, Eric July, even though I think he was brought into this off, he couldn't have done anything to not get involved in this. He was pulled into it by other people, absolutely.
Yeah.
But man, it's a masterclass in how not to react to things on the internet. Because I've seen this play out, and I'm like, you gotta like take a step back from the computer, like set the fucking Twitter down for a second. Because all the trolls that he's ultimately grappling with are all people who are living on Twitter, who are doing all this stuff on here. And it's like, you have a business to run. So, like, that needs to be your mindset. Like, just fuck these people, run your business, make fun 100%. Of them, clown them, do the monetization thing. But why are you like, I have screenshots of a video that or a stream I'll do or something where I was talking about this exact stuff is you have this literal blocks of Twitter replies of Eric replying to people in his replies, basically trying to respond to them in a way of arguing with them. And I'm like, these people aren't real. Like, you're arguing with figments of your imagination, and you're basically getting tricked into doing it. Like, and so you need to like take a step back. So I see both sides there, and I like, as somebody who's a fan of both of them, I'm watching this whole thing, sort of doing it for the content at this point. I mentioned that on the stream. I was like, Eric July is never going to notice my existence, so it just is sort of the way it is on the internet. That's how it works. And I've seen him live, like I've went and seen him speak, and stuff like that. As far as Dick and them, like, yeah, I talk to Dick occasionally on Twitter and things like that, but I think I'll use this as an opportunity for some content. As I immediately said.
Well, I mean, and I guess when I look at it though, I don't. I guess I look at it this way. Dick finally came through with his, the whole like, oh, have you read it? Well, no, I haven't read it. And then, the idea though that it's, Dick finally gave him criticism. Well, yeah, but you'd already come across an asshole, so nobody's actually going to listen to you at that point.
Oh, I agree with that. And I 100% agree with that.
And it doesn't help that Eric's like, okay, well, fuck all you guys. And I think Eric certainly has the issue of, well, I made $5 million. Like, yeah, but you have to keep. You made a good move, but these guys might be right. It doesn't help though that the people who are trying to talk shit to you, as much as I will say, I think Kiwi Farms, whether you like them or hate them over there, they point out like, Dick talks a lot of crap, and Vito could talk a lot of crap, but when the people trying to offer you criticism are guys who haven't made their big hit, like, yeah, Dick was on Dr. Phil and then some other things, but like, well, since then, what? You know, this is like, it's kind of like, you know, the old the child star from like 35 years ago trying to tell you what's up. And you're like, who the hell are you? And
Yeah,
it
but
just, it doesn't, but
I
Eric,
also
Eric feeds into it though.
right. So and that's sort of the side comparison there is again, like, I don't think Dick and Vito, you know, and like, okay, Riley is, for instance, like with the whole warehouse stuff, like, the reaction to that was poor. Like, it was just not good. Like, there was 1,000 ways to react to that, and by the way, not just him, but Riley doing it in the first place, I don't agree with. Like, I'll say that. But at the same time, it is a public place. If I Google it, it comes up. So, like, if I'm in that area, like, what the fuck? Like, this isn't weird, and it's certainly not outside the scope of the internet. Anybody who's lived on the internet for any scope of time knows that kind of shit is common.
Well, I mean, we had "He Will Not Divide Us" for a whole fucking year. So the idea of him showing up and like, you know, this is the part where like Eric blew it up. You know, he was vandalizing my property. I'm like, dude, he left you like how much money? Like,
it was $41.
Yeah, this is one of the few times in history where the vandal actually made your like, yes, he vandalized your property, but he made you money.
Yeah.
So, but because like, really, okay, fine, you peel the tape off, and now you got $40 in your pocket. You know, so and then like, you know, well, I could kill, like, you know, and the whole, it just everybody acting up and everybody doing this made it so much worse. And
yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how things progress. I do think it'll be, you know, with the legal side of it going forward. I think that's going to be sort of you know, going to be interesting, because I think there's going to be a lot of lawyers who have to decide, well, do we cover this or do we not? You know, like,
well, I don't think a lot will. I think they're going to be like, yeah, it's worth covering. But
I know I want to cover it because I'm like, this seems like something that's happening now, and I'm not doing this kind of shit on my channel. So it's like, well, I kind of have to, like, you know.
The sector is going to burst into flames. I can tell you that much once this gets going.
Fuck yes.
I will say, though, in Eric's defense, in addition to why he should fight it, from what I understand, I could have sworn he said in one of his things, these guys wanted perpetual royalty or perpetual. They wanted to get their beak wet. But for some reason, I heard something like they wanted like a few $100,000 as part of like their beak wetting. And it's like,
so I know people think that's, so here's the thing. I think people look at that as being crazy, but I've dealt with like 501c and stuff like that, and those kind of organizations and things. And so when I looked at the asset value of their organization, and they don't have, they're I think they have like maybe $1.5 million, $2 million in total assets. Yeah, so you're talking about a right. And my guess, and I know people might take offense to this, but listen, if Eric has made 6 or whatever, I think something like that million off his comic, my guess is he maybe has 1.5, 2.5, 3 of that liquid. The rest of that is going to be tied up and stuff or gone completely. Like, that's just how it works. And so when I look at that, I'm going, well, they have about this, you know, they're going to have somewhat similar size actual asset power behind them. But the trick in the sleeve here is this group is a charity. And so they're going to have access to great legal groups that'll work for basically nothing, which is, that becomes sort of a tricky thing too, because Eric's going to have to spend a lot of money on this, and they're probably not going to have to spend nearly as much.
Well,
and that's something,
they'll have to spend some money.
Yeah.
I guess, but here's the thing though. They don't have that much money to start with, but they want a couple.
So that's why I think they went for cash, because they're like smaller than he is. So they looked at it as, okay, this is our payout. We're going to go after some money, you know, up front.
Yeah. But that's why when I look at it, it's like, fuck those guys. Like, you weren't, nobody knew who you were. Nobody would care afterwards. And, you know, to try to shake them down for like perpetual, we want a couple $100,000 every year.
Yeah. It's dirty. I hate that shit. But I mean, at the same time, I get it. But it's like, I hate that shit. It's like, that's the dirty world of the legal side of things. All right, let's talk about I agree with this chat. Let's get off comics for a bit.
Sure. Although I do like the guy who says you should invite Vito, Nick, and Eric up to Alaska for mutual combat in the woods.
So I've
Host them.
almost had Vito on. I've almost had Vito on this show twice.
Oh.
I'm going to have Dick on this show on episode 108 or 109. One of the two.
Really? You got it all nice. You're better. You're better at scheduling guests than me.
No, so it's kind of an inside joke because Maddox, the guy who was involved with Dick, left.
Yeah.
And did that whole thing when they were at episode 107.
Oh.
So the whole joke is that Dick does not go on people's shows until they have at least that many episodes.
Yeah,
so you have to wait. So I already DM'd him and set stuff up for way down in the future.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, like I'm fans of both sides of the whole thing. So that's why I was going on streams to talk about it and figured I'd cover it and sort of give my general takes. I'm also like a troll. Like I came up in that side of the internet, and so like this whole thing,
I did too.
Yeah, I mean, I the forums and Reddit and the forums before that and stuff like that, and then on top of that, like you've got the fact that again, like I grew up with not much access to like a social outlet, so the internet was sort of that social outlet for a long time. So that's sort of how it went for a while. But so I think that's sort of why I have the views I have on a lot
trolling
of this
bears
stuff.
and moose.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so that's sort of where I'm at. But yeah, we'll talk about this this whole legal stuff going on with 2024 because that's something that I think is mildly interesting. Sure. What is your take on how we're moving in politically to this whole shitstorm of? I mean, a lot of this involves lawfare, right? We've got this whole stuff with Trump. We've got, on top of that, just the Supreme Court being like, I think a little more important at this point because it's getting used a lot more, at least publicly. Like that becomes something that people are talking about a lot more. But what's your take on 2024? What crystal ball? What do you think's going to happen?
Well, like the meme says, where the guy's sitting on the tank looking back at you, it's going to get a lot worse.
Yeah,
it's only going to get worse from here. I think, for example, one of the things to see is the case down in Georgia. It's collapsed.
Yeah, it doesn't look good.
Yeah, and the fact that these two people who basically got misdemeanors and diversion programs for doing some of the most, if they really, they're subverting democracy and undermining the will of the people, and we won't take that in Georgia. You gave a dude diversion, meaning his conviction goes away.
Yeah.
And then you give the other lady misdemeanors, which will go away. If it's that serious, why did you cut them deals like that? And everybody likes to think, oh, well, it's, that's how you make them flip. Well, no, if you're holding all the cards and, as a prosecutor, like, okay, Sydney, I'll let you, Sydney Powell, you get to plead to one felony, you're going to do 2 years in prison. Oh, you don't want that? Fine. You're going to look at like life in prison. The idea you would give it all away is either a sign that you knew it was wrong to start with to charge them like this, or B, you're absolutely insane and you're making like Epstein level deals that are horribly corrupt. So this is just, once this starts falling apart, there's going to be a lot of pressure on these other cases. Like the one, like Trump stuff up in New York, it's starting to kind of backslide. The judge Engeron is turned it into kind of a shit show there, and it's starting to fall apart. Judge Shukin in DC has, trying to limit the way she's limiting things, and even though it's a fairly tame gag order, it's still a prior restraint, and I don't think she has the right to do it.
No, it didn't seem like it.
It's going to get worse and worse from here. I mean, and think about like for the documents case down in Florida, we haven't heard. You notice there haven't been any leaks from that. Why? Because if there are leaks, that means some like good shit is out there. Yeah. And it's going to be a slow motion implosion.
Quagmire.
Yeah, it's going to be a slow motion implosion. I mean, at this point, Trump is going to win the nomination. I don't know who else is going to beat him at this point.
So let's talk. Who do you think Trump? I agree with you there. By the way, I think Trump wins the nomination. Republicans. I don't
good,
think
bad, or
there's a chance
indifferent. That's he's going to be running the show.
Yeah, I don't see a way around it. I had some hope for people like Vivek or more than DeSantis, but I think that guy just deflated his entire run over the last like 3 months with some of his statements and things he's done.
Well, when George Soros pays for your law school, I have a lot of concerns about your loyalty.
Yeah, that's rough. And
especially
he,
when you're a millionaire already.
I don't think he defends himself nearly well enough. He's somebody who would get torn apart on the debate stage, I think, as well. And I think part of that comes from the fact that he probably is just already insulated, but it's not already insulated in the way that Trump is, because he's rich in the fact that, like, Vivek is not somebody who spends money like Trump does. Yeah. He's not, like, out there with all these investment programs and stuff. Trump's rich in a way that, like, they can take it all from him. So he knows there's like Hail Marys involved with stuff, and like because there's so much of the system trying to take that shit that like fuck up. Like
and his net worth, I mean, what's Vivek's net worth right now?
It's gotta be crazy.
Yeah. Crazy. I don't think it's that good.
But it's okay. I guess I think of the pharmaceutical.
Actually, his net worth is a $950 million.
Yeah, that's nuts.
So that's a lot. He's got fuck you money too.
He's got fuck you money and then some. Yeah, that's good. Anything over 500 million, you've got fuck you money and then a little bit extra in the bank.
But his, like I said, his money, it makes him very suspect. He's very corporate, and I think he couldn't shake that image.
No,
also, and he's from Ohio. You can't vote for a guy from Ohio.
I always said, like, we should have like a presidential candidate that comes from Alaska, and then I immediately go, you know what? Actually, I don't think anybody would ever go for that. It's never gonna happen. I don't want it. Don't do it.
you're like, as somebody who lives in Alaska and is from Alaska, like, wait, that could be me, and like, I don't want that.
I immediately was like, I think unless it was somebody I was like, like if Joe Vogler was alive today or something like that, or one of these figures from back in the day was around, I'd be like, yeah, we could get behind that. But aside from like, unless you're Ron Paul, this ain't happening. Like, and Ron Paul from Alaska would probably be incomprehensible. I don't think you'd be able to understand a word he said. The problem with Alaskans is like everything gets simplified. So the accent in Alaska isn't really an accent as much as it is the lack of an accent and the additives of cutting out all the simple words. So people will like do all those stupid draw words. They throw in all words you don't need. And it's so everybody talks slow. It's sort of like the South in that context. Probably has to do with the fact that a bunch of people from the South move up here because they're, tired of having a state half the size of ours. I like giving shit to people from Texas. It's sort of a going joke if you're Alaskan. Because Texans all wear around this shit that talks about how their state's big. But if you actually cut Alaska in half, it makes Texas the third largest state.
Yes, that is very funny.
It's like, motherfuckers, like if you put Alaska in the middle of the US like footprint, it's nuts. It's like we can go from one end to the other end with the Aleutian Islands, like it's nuts. And you don't like get the size until you're like visit a state like this, because you're just like, oh, like I'm in a city. You could be in the biggest city, like Anchorage just got like 200,000 or 150,000, somewhere in that ballpark, and you're like, go a 2-hour drive from there, and you're like, and there's nobody here for another. Like you could just disappear. I mean, it's like that kind of.
Yeah, it's like Call of the Wild. Like you can die, no one hears you scream. No one might ever find you.
Yeah, but at the same time, you can also like. the way we lived, like you were talking about, where it's like, we're 30 to an hour
Yeah.
away from like a small store and like, groceries and all that kind of stuff. And like I was used to that growing up. So like I, went and played Magic tournaments for Magic the Gathering. I would hitchhike, to Wasilla, which is like,
Oh, jeez.
like hitchhiking to go play Magic the Gathering, like, that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, nobody's gonna kidnap and murder you. You start talking about magic, they're like, "All right, I don't want to sit in the. I'll actually take him where he's going because I don't want to hear
It's
about this."
actually it's crazy how little like people give a fuck about hitchhikers in Alaska because they're everywhere. Like hitchhiking's
Yeah, that's how
pretty
you get
like
around.
common
Yeah.
here. Yeah, and like you go over to like some of the areas I've been to in like rural Florida and rural like Texas and those areas. I have family from Alto, Texas, and places like that. And you go to those areas and there's hitchhiking, like they're back to hitchhiking. And then I go to the cities and it's like I would never pick any of these people up in my car. Fucking like I immediately like I have the opposite perspective. Like the person in Hicksville is the person I'm more likely to pick up than the person on the like highway in fucking
Mm-hmm.
California or fucking New York, God forbid. Although I have yet to visit a few of the states. I still need to make a trip to New York because the only time I've been there is during like layovers. Like,
I mean, like New York's okay. I mean, I've been there before. I've got family. Like my family, my mom's family's from New York City, so
Oh, okay.
like I've been in New York. I've been in rural New York. I mean, literally, it's. I mean, like it's a nice state and there's history and all that, but like for example, some of us, some family, my girlfriend and I and some of her family went to they want to go to the Catskill Mountains, and that's like down in the southern part of like New York. But
Right.
it's like
That's
it's still
the
really
Jewy area.
well, yes, but there weren't no running around when we were there. But like we went there,
I'm allowed to say that.
and we went there and it was for the 4th of July, and it's like, well, we can get fireworks, and I'm like, ain't no way in hell I'm bringing fireworks from out of state into the state of New York. I'm like, they're probably a felony at some point. And we were the Airbnb we were at on the one lake we were at, it was like it was a mile from the state trooper post, and I'm like, the state police post, and I'm like, I am not doing this. And then
yeah.
then my girlfriend's like, well, can you bring your gun? And I was like, no.
No. Yeah.
Nope. Yeah, not happening. And then I mean, like, so there was that, but like New York City, for example, my mom's family's from Brooklyn, and a couple years ago my grandmother died and had to go into town. So we drove all the way from over here in Cleveland, like wanted to drive. It's like we drove into New York City. And it was a fun drive, nice drive. We come in through Staten Island, and that's actually a nice drive. And then we get to Brooklyn and we're on the side streets, and you put your windows down and it's just like it smells. Like Tim Pool says it smells like warm milk, and it's like, yeah, it kind of does. You're not missing much. Like there's sights to see, but it's like a gritty, shitty cities.
Yeah, I don't really, so like I went through in Seattle, there's a place there that everybody was calling the zoo. It's like next to one of the big public hospitals there, and it's like a giant homeless encampment where it's like all just settled in under the highways and shit.
Is that the one that burned down?
Yeah, so it did. Yeah, very recently.
Quotation
so
marks.
That right, yeah. So back just, years ago, I had to go through there to find somebody. It's a convoluted story, but we flew over from Alaska and went into Seattle, and me and my dad went to go find this person. So I'm going with him because I'm a bigger guy, and so I'm like, he's not as big as I am, and he's like, going through this group of people, and like we're going through there, and it's a sea of rats, and you're like, I mean, there's a point where we were walking, and there's like pavement with the sidewalk that runs along the highway underpass, and there's a break in the pavement where like some pipes ran under and stuff, but the break was only maybe about 3 feet wide, and so we were going to step over the break. But then you kind of go around it. But we got to the point where we were looking over it, and you look down, and it's just moving because there's just rats pouring over this like breakaway in the concrete because that's where they're all coming from into this fucking opening, where they're all going out into the open, area. And I'm like, oh, this is like Resident Evil shit. Like, I mean, and these are not small; these are fucking rabbits. Like, I'm like,
no, big rats, yeah.
Yeah, and and then you go up and you're just in these tents and this, these areas, and it's like, listen, I've been around, like, lived in tents and done that whole thing, and like, it never looked like that. like I had a, I've lived in trailers and tents and, all kinds of shelters. Never made them look like I was living in a fucking Star Wars slum.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and you're walking through there, and you're like, I'm gonna get killed any second here.
Oh yeah, I mean, and you're in Seattle, an area where they're like, oh, you're like, you want to protect yourself? Guess not. Like,
Yes.
So there's that angle to it, and you're coming from Alaska, where it's like, I mean, the opposite, like the polar opposite, couldn't be more different. It's like, here it's like, well, I mean, somebody's on your property, you got a no trespassing sign. Sucks to be them, like, kind of situation. Like, that's kind of how the state is. It's same way with like self-defense stuff. I mean, like, the idea that you're going to walk up to somebody and assault them and that person doesn't have the right to defend themselves in this state would be laughed at. Like, I mean, so a lot of that comes down to like the homeless who do exist here are just they're not as likely to instigate those things. It's very much a nuisance, but it's just not the same.
It's a nuisance, not a public health crisis.
Yeah, and then you go to the cities that I've been to, and you're just like, this is the opposite.
Well, also in Alaska, though, the homeless people there realize, like, if we cause problems, they'll let us freeze to death in the winter.
Yeah, so it's a survival thing too, because there's
a motivation not to cause problems.
Yeah, I mean, there's shelters and camps and things that the city sets up, but
but even then, like, if it became a big enough problem, it's like, okay, we'll give you a camp, but it's like nobody's going to give you anything.
Exactly,
and also a lot of things could happen in the middle of a blizzard.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there was somebody who they claimed it was like an explosion because of like camping stuff, and everybody was like, nah, I don't think so. Like, I think somebody just chucked a pipe bomb into the fucking, mix. And I think that's happened a couple times here because it's like, and that's really fucking unfortunate. I've argued this for a while, but it's like you have all the federal land here, and we got rid of the idea of homesteading. And up until that point, like in Alaska, I mean, the concept of homesteading was pretty stead true. And we kept homesteading 10 years longer than everybody else. But everybody else got rid of it, and Alaska's like, yeah, we're going to hold on to it for a little longer.
I think it's a pretty neat concept.
I not only think it's a good concept, but when you live in a state like mine where 60% of the state is owned by the feds and just nothing being done with it, you go, fucking cut some of their fat and turn it over to a homestead program and let these people build houses. Like, we did this for 100 years. Like, I mean, that was how people came to Alaska. Like, that was how it worked. You showed up through the Yukon Territory. You came through Skagway, like my poster says in the back here. And you made your way into the state and found where you fit and got work, and you built a home. That's why log cabins became the main staple here, is because people would just build out of the materials that existed. So you showed up and got a piece of land, and there's your logs, and you go to work, And we've removed that part of the culture from the state. I think it was a big mistake. I talk about the fact that this is one of the few states, like, just in 1972, the guy who was the governor of the state was a guy named Dick Randolph. He's a libertarian, right? We had an elected libertarian as the governor of the state. We had another elected libertarian after him. We had representatives who were elected libertarians. Like, this state culturally has, especially the older people here, have much more tie to the old school, like, brick and mortar conservatism, like anti-government, anti-taxes, pro-land, that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. And so that's what I think has insulated our state. But you can see from a political angle, as those people are slowly dying off, it's getting worse and worse and worse. Like,
Yeah.
because
You're
those
the
people
greater
are,
state.
it's almost in a way the opposite of what people talk about on the federal level with DC, where like all these old people are in charge and we're just waiting for them to die off so they can be replaced. And it's like, yeah, Alaska's going through the opposite of that, where all the old people who are dying off are the people who are keeping this place out of the federal government's control. And like now, those people are going to die and be replaced by these young people who are like, hey, I'll suck a boot if you give me a payoff. Like, you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
No, that's the
just
sad part.
yeah, it's principle. I talk about this a lot. It's in the beginning of that Vogler doc. I talk about how why I got fascinated with his story was because I was like, listening to him speak is very.
Mhm.
He's a very emotional guy when he gives these speeches, and he was a lawyer, so I understand there's that in it. But when you hear him speak, you're like, oh, this is a guy who gave a shit about the place he lived in. Like, he cared about the people who were around him. He
Yeah.
was born in the fucking Great Depression. Like, this is a dude who lived through, legitimate American triumph. So he was trying to make the argument of we need that here, right? So like, when you hear that kind of stuff and then you hear the comparison of it, like people just 20, 30 years later, and it's like, we need the federal government to come in and give us infrastructure because we don't have roads and we don't have this. It's like, you fucking people are idiots. Like, the second they get in here, it means they just own everything. Like,
Yes.
and now they have control of all your infrastructure.
There isn't that stuff here.
Yeah, the whole point of the state existing was that you didn't have that. I talk about on the back here, this says the Committee of 101, Protecting Skagway. And what that's talking about is this guy, this dude right here. This dude is Jefferson Soapy Smith. And Joseph
Soapy.
Soapy Smith. So he got his start conning people throughout a bunch of Western countries. He killed a few people, including somebody who was a sheriff. He was wanted in a bunch of places. And he decided to come up to Alaska during the gold rush to Skagway. And he, donated to build churches and did all these good things that appeared to be so great. But at the same time, this guy was conning everybody in the town and stealing from people. He built telegraph offices where the telegraph wires went to nowhere, and he would request people to send their families money, and then he would just collect the money, and the telegraphs weren't going anywhere. They didn't get a telegraph office till years and years later. He would run postal office scams and con people with shell games on the street. But ultimately, what got him fucked was that the people of Skagway got pretty pissed off about this stuff happening. And the problem is that the law in that area, there wasn't any, right? You had some groups that did, vigilante justice, which I've talked about on my channel, that existed in the state. But at the time, there wasn't cops from an American point of view, legal authorities close by. And the Canadians, the Canucks didn't do anything. They weren't involved in it, so they wouldn't get involved. And so what ended up happening was the townspeople got together and they organized this group called the Committee of 101, which goes back to sort of native ideas in the state. And they formed a group to be a vigilante posse to deal with Soapy Smith. Soapy Smith heard about this and went to their meeting hall at a bar that they were meeting at and attempted to get in an argument with them. And Frank Reed, who was the town's engineer, and him got in a dispute. Frank Reed and him both pulled guns. Soapy Smith said, God damn it, don't shoot, man. And Frank Reed shot him. Soapy Smith shot Frank Reed, and both of them ended up dying. Soapy Smith died immediately. Frank Reed died like 2 weeks later from an infection. And Soapy Smith, the guy's he was a piece of shit. Like, this is a dude who was stealing money. But what ended up getting him killed was that he wasn't conning somebody that got him killed. It was the fact that a few weeks before this happened, a pretty well-known guy who had come there to prospect mine, who was an older gentleman in his late 50s or 60s, went and collected some gold and hid it rich. And he came back to Skagway with his gold. And while he was in the middle of a gambling game with one of Skagway's men on the pier, one of Soapy Smith's sidemen grabbed his sack and ran off with it and just stole his gold.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the problem with that is when you're running a mining town, if people think that if they come and strike it rich, they're going to have their shit stolen, they won't come to your town. Yes. And so the people were like, this guy is going to single-handedly destroy our economy. And so that was what pushed them to form this group and decide, okay, this guy's got to get dealt with. And if you go to Skagway today, Soapy Smith is buried in this little shithole grave, like outside of any of the confines of the town. And then Frank Reed is buried in the like church cemetery with like all this adornment around him.
At the best tombstone.
It's pretty fucking funny to see it in person. You're like, oh, this is hilarious. Like, awesome. This is just the people even back then in like 1898 were just shitting on him. Like, But yeah, that's one of those stories where it's like that whole thing and is an interesting part of history. This is a Joe Vogler quote here. I'm an Alaskan, not an American. I've got no use for America or her damned institutions. He has some fucking amazing quotes from when he was around. And then this one's about Michael Heaney, who built the railroad through the Irish Prince is what he was called in a lot of writings. He's the dude who built the railroad through Skagway and everything that they used for the big gold boom here. Because back then, they had a bunch of investors come, and the investors were like, we can't do it. And his quote to them was, give me enough dynamite and snooze, and I'll build a railroad to hell, was the quote that was always attributed to him on it. So, all right. Well, I think we've had a great show. I know I'm rambling on, but
it's all right. No, it's interesting learning about it because that's, I know some about Alaska, and like my dad used to go up there do a lot of fishing in like the 80s and 90s. He had a buddy that moved up there for work, and he talked about like how it was up there, and back then they joked like you went to prison longer for killing a bear out of season than you were for killing your wife.
Yeah. It's still kind of the same way.
But it's, the way he said it was back then, he's like, it was so, like, everything was so cool. And, like, he said it was just a different vibe. And, going back in the last 15 years, it's like completely different vibe now.
Yeah, it's changed. It's changed. You have to be in the smaller areas to still get that same sort of Alaska vibe. If you're in the cities now, it's just a hellscape. It's the major cities have turned into even with a population of 200,000 or 300,000. There's nothing you can do about it. They just turn into the same thing. It's just on a smaller level. All right. Well, I think we've had a good show. I've rambled on enough.
I think so. That was a great show.
Well, I will plug you, of course. Go check out Sean's YouTube channel. I put a link in the description to this stream, so you can do it straight through there. And then your Twitter handle. What was your Twitter at?
My Twitter's at LawTube Sean.
Long
story behind that. Yeah. Well, I initially had potentially Crim. Then some stuff happened, and I had to refugee to my lifeboat.
I think I had you when you were still potentially Crim on Twitter for a little while. So
yeah, I got freed from the gulag, but this other one's bigger now, so I'm keeping it.
Yeah, I have a bunch of friends that have had that same situation where they got banned so long ago, they got their new accounts back, and they're like, well, shit, you got like 1,500 followers in this one and like 3,000 on this one, like, or whatever. All right, well, obviously subscribe to this channel if you guys want to see more content. I'll have some streams coming up soon, probably tomorrow, because I'm going to have the day off. But, lots of stuff coming up. Got some new documentaries and all that stuff. But yes, uh, thank you guys for sticking around, and have a nice night. Peace.